Now, Darwin. It clearly is a mapping between the two stages of what James called mental evolution and what Darwin called us two stages. And to see the parallel, he writes about this. This is quoting James, a remarkable parallel, which I think has never been noticed. Of course, it's only been 30 years since Darwin, 25 years since Darwin, obtains between the facts of social evolution on the one hand and of zoological evolution as expounded by Mr. Darwin on the other. I can easily show that as a matter of fact, the new conceptions, the emotions, and active tendencies which evolve are originally produced in the shape of random images, fancies, accidental outbursts of spontaneous variation in the functional activity of the excessively unstable human brain. What an insight. You can feel his blooming, buzzing confusion coming, and you can feel the idea that accidents are happening in the brain, in the world, and we have to respond all the time. And we can respond without making what we do random, but just by picking one of the best ideas to commit to or to grant consent to. Now, I thought I changed the title of this slide to In the Footsteps of William James, but that's in the online version. By the way, all these slides are online, and the link is at the bottom of your handout, so you needn't take real notes. You've got them all there to look at later. Feel free to use them in your own talks, because I'm hoping you will join me in a campaign to get priority for William James. I wanted to say that Lynn and Paul have named this conference In the Footsteps of William James, and it's a very nice thought that, to me, the most important footsteps he ever took were the virtual footsteps. He asked us to consider when he spoke to the Harvard Divinity School graduating class, and he said to them, "What's meant by saying that my choice of which way to walk home after this lecture is ambiguous and a matter of chance? It means that both Divinity Avenue, here, private way, I don't know, those of you who know Cambridge, he's talking in Lawrence Lowell Lecture Hall, Lowell Lec, which is where Charles Peirce delivered his lectures, very famous, wonderful place. It's at the corner of Oxford Street and Kirkland Street, which it means that both Divinity Avenue and Oxford Street are called, but only one, and that one, either one, shall be chosen." Beautifully brilliant statement of the ambiguous nature of the future. He said, now you students, I know you think that when I walked down Oxford Street, I was determined to walk down Oxford Street. And I can't convince you otherwise. You're free to decide to be determined, as others have pointed out. He never wanted to coerce the students. But you know, I am actually free to do either one of those, and no rewinding of the universe would ever reveal that I had that freedom. Because once it's committed to a kind of instant replay movie, which he considered, not a movie, but an instant replay where God could crank the world back for us, it would be the fact that he would sometimes do one, sometimes do the other, and that would be random chance. Now today, notice the Divinity Avenue sign, 1 block down from Lowell Lec Hall, okay? 1 block down is William James Hall, the tallest building on the Harvard campus. And you would think there would reside the legacy of William James. But instead, in that building, the occupants, with a notable exception of Steve Coslin, who I learn about from Craig Lambert, who's with us here, I think from you that Steve is leaving Harvard and going to run an institute in Stanford, a great loss because he's the William James, he has a chair that's in the memory of William James, and he is one of the few who holds a position of free will. Most of them are determinists and compatibilists. And what they really are the hard and soft determinists of James' Dilemma of Determinism lecture that he gave 1 block away, but there's hardly anyone in that building who knows that. And you have to help me to get the message to them that there's something really important to think about in his work. And I hope to give a lecture in William James Hall, but Dan Wegner, who wrote that book, that Free Will is an Illusion, won't talk to me so far. He's swamped at the moment. He's maybe in the summer. Oh, no, it's the summer. I'm very busy. I'm on vacation. Maybe in the fall. I'm kind of getting that because I'm an outsider, like many of you I know as independent scholars probably recognize that problem. Okay. On your handouts, I want you to learn something and learn it well enough to recognize it when you read a philosophical treatise on this subject. Because I have a page on the standard argument, so it's a blue link. On that page, you'll see about 35 philosophers who state this argument. Only a few of them say it's a standard argument, but they all use the same argument. So you need to know this argument and find the flaw in it in order to defeat it. Otherwise, these guys are going to convince all the students of the future who take classes on philosophy and free will. So here goes the standard argument. The most famous guy is J.J.C. Smart, who has this argument. Some who quote earlier ones almost always quote Smart. Smart says, it's a logical problem. Either determinism is true or indeterminism is true. Can't fault that logic. If determinism is true, we're not free. Now he means predeterminism. If indeterminism is true, our will is random and we can't be responsible for our actions. Okay? So logical philosophers conclude free will is incompatible, and this becomes a technical jargon term in modern classes on philosophy, whether free will is compatible with determinism or incompatible with determinism. And incompatible means you could be incompatible because determinism is true, or you could be incompatible because determinism is false and free will is something else. It's a hell of a mess in terms of the clear, critical, conceptual thinking that most analytic language philosophers pride themselves on. I find them engaging in a very confusing and messy set of terms, rather than just talking about whether we have free will or whether determinism is true. In any case, logical philosophers say no free will either way. But this standard argument is quite old, and among those I found writing it, I find John Fiske, one of the Metaphysical Club members, with James and Peirce and the great Judge. Anyway, here he is quoting John Fiske, his contemporary, in the Principles. Volitions are either caused or they're not. If they're not caused, an inexorable logic brings us to absurdities. I love the one that J.J.C. Smart told me. In one of his writings, he said, if indeterminism was true, then a quantum event in my brain might make me jump out the window into my garden and eat a slug. And I thought, I've spoken to J.J.C. Smart a couple of times. He's 96, still quite active, still a solid determinist as any. And I said to him, Jack, that is one of the most creative things I've ever seen written. A little silly, but it is creative, and it's a sign to me that you have a free mind that can create new ideas, and that's one of them. Although he said, thanks, Bob, he still didn't feel convinced that he was actually free to do something that had never been done or said before. Okay, today, let's take Steven Pinker, who is one of Harvard's foremost popular public intellectuals today, wonderful books, How the Mind Works. And in How the Mind Works, in 1997, he wrote this: a random event does not fit the concept of free will any more than a lawful one does, and couldn't serve as that long-sought locus of moral responsibility. He is simply wrong. Randomness is just an enabler. It is not in our decision itself at a single moment. So, what's the problem with the standard argument? First, I want to convince you that it's not incompatible with indeterminism. For James, some indeterminism is a simple requirement because it breaks the causal chain back to Aristotle's prime mover, or Aquinas' God. Okay? If you break that chain, at least we've established step one. We could be undetermined. Okay? And we'll see another thing is that time matters. And a flaw in this simple logical argument is that it thinks the moment of free will is a moment, rather than James would have it as a process over time. Okay, and although I say, and the point is to see that indeterminism comes in the early stage of our decision making, where choices, or what James called alternative possibilities, are being drummed up for us to go with, and the later stage can be adequately determined. But that adequately conditional adjective there says that even though physics now shows us that the universe is fundamentally and irreducibly indeterministic at the microscopic scale of quantum mechanics, we now know that chance is real in a way that James could only have intuited. And boy, people have put down intuition and introspection for years, but this man saw past the powerful thinking of the best scientists of his age to see into a time when chance would actually be real. But now, can we reconcile it and not have it destroy our responsibility? James knew that if there was indeterminism that directly caused the decision, that would be a problem. If our decisions are random, they're not caused by our reasons and our desires. They're just a flip of a coin. And my friend Robert Kane, who is the editor of the Oxford Handbook of Free Will and one of the 5 people who discussed James' idea of the two-stage model without knowing it was James' idea. Bob Kane is now the subject of my first DVD on philosophers who've written on free will. He came to Harvard in the fall, and I made a videotape of an 82-minute lecture of his life's work, which will be available. I'm trying to convince him to put it on the web. Anyway, Bob Kane has a cute argument, which I will set aside for the moment, but just so you know. Genius of William James, I say, was to limit that indeterminism. The way Kant wanted to put limits on reason, William James limits the indeterminism to generating the alternative possibilities, which seem to present themselves for evaluation. And in the later evaluation stage, we need some determinism. Now, what did he say about determinism? He said, it isn't determinism that's our problem, or some determination of our actions by our values, by our desires, by our feelings, by our motives. A little bit of determination of what we do based on our character is not a problem. And we'll see that in one of his great students. But it's predeterminism that's the problem. It's the Calvinist notion that God set the whole thing up and is in charge and it's flowing in an orderly way, or the physics Newtonian view. It's predeterminism from time zero that's the problem. Actions are determined since before our births and so forth. James says an effort of will grants consent to one of those alternative possibilities. So he answers the question, which Bob Richardson gave us this morning. Will you or won't you have it so? You have a chance to say which of it is.